One evening, Tom, a delivery driver who had been having financial difficulties, did a small deed of compassion by assisting an old woman in crossing the street. He had no idea that insignificant gesture would trigger a momentous occasion. A black SUV started pursuing him the very next day, and what had appeared to be a typical workday became much more enigmatic. Welcome to Mystic Tales, everyone. I'm thrilled to share a brand new tale with you today. A delivery driver assists an older woman in crossing the street. He is followed by a black SUV the following day. Let's begin. Tom was just another man. He worked as a delivery driver during the day, moving things from one home to another while traveling the same streets. For him, life was straightforward but challenging. No matter how hard he worked, it always felt like he was barely making ends meet because of the long hours and the constant expenditures. Nevertheless, he took solace in his regimen. He only wanted enough to get by in life and didn't have high expectations. Tom was on his final destination one rainy evening after a long day of deliveries. The streets were sloppy with water, and the weather had gotten worse. He saw an elderly woman standing near the corner of the home as he pulled up. She appeared frail, straining to cross the crowded street, and hardly able to move. Automobiles sped by, ignoring her. Weary after the day, Tom paused for a second, but he felt compelled to lend a hand. He jogged over after getting out of his truck and took the woman by the arm. Silently, he said, "Let me help you, ma'am." Her eyes were filled with gratitude as she gazed up at him. "Young man, thank you. I haven't experienced such kindness from anyone in a very long time." He assisted her in safely crossing the street. It was a modest gesture, and Tom smiled courteously at her as soon as she crossed across and went back to his truck. As he drove away and vanished into the night, the woman waved at him. Tom didn't give it any further attention. It seemed like a straightforward act of charity to him, something that anybody would do. However, an odd occurrence occurred the following morning. The morning got off to a typical start. After getting up early and grabbing a quick breakfast, Tom left for another delivery day. The roads were congested with the typical traffic, and the sky was clear. He saw something strange as he drove through the well-known streets. An SUV that was black was visible in his rearview mirror. At first, it was nothing unusual, but the SUV continued to follow him after he made multiple turns. Tom dismissed it, supposing it was merely a coincidence. However, the SUV appeared to follow him everywhere he went as the day wore on. It was always there, parked far away, when he delivered a box. There were always a few automobiles following him as he departed a neighborhood. He even stopped at one point in the hopes that the car would go by, but it didn't. It paused, seemingly waiting a few feet distant. Tom felt a shiver go down his back. Who were these individuals? What were they hoping to get out of him? He told himself it was merely paranoia and tried to keep his attention on his work. It might have been a neighbor or someone who lived close by. However, he had a gut feeling that something wasn't quite right. The black SUV was there each time he looked in the mirror, silently observing. Tom was tense by the conclusion of the day. In an attempt to avoid losing the SUV, he cautiously drove home, making more twists than normal. However, the black SUV slowly drove by before parking at the end of the block when he eventually pulled into his driveway. It remained there for some time, perhaps anticipating his next action. The windows were too dark for him to see who was inside. Tom shut his shades, locked his doors, and made an effort to ignore the ideas. Perhaps it had all been in his mind. However, fear began to creep in, and he thought about it all night. Tom prayed that things would return to normal the following day. He persuaded himself that the black SUV was really a coincidence, possibly even belonging to a close resident. However, he saw it once again as he was leaving his home for work. A few homes away, the identical black SUV was parked and was simply sitting there. It pulled away as soon as Tom got behind the wheel and proceeded to follow him again. Tom was becoming nervous by this point. His head was full of inquiries. Why would anyone want to follow him? He led a typical life as a delivery driver. He had no debts, no enemies, and nothing that would draw this kind of notice. The SUV remained nearby while he carried on his deliveries. It would occasionally park a street away, and other times it would come right up to him. He also attempted to drive in circles around the area, but the SUV was always able to see him. Tom thought about phoning the police, but what would he say? That he was being followed by a car? He questioned whether that was sufficient for them to act. Furthermore, who could tell who was driving? He had no desire to become involved in anything potentially hazardous. The odd thing was that whatever was pursuing him never came close. They never threatened anyone and never got out of the automobile. They merely observed. Keep quiet, patient. They seemed to be waiting for something, almost. Later that day, Tom made the decision to face his phobia while delivering something in a peaceful neighborhood. After parking his truck, he exited and made his way over to the SUV. His palms were sweating as he walked closer, his heart pounding. However, the SUV's engine roared to life as he approached, and it took off before he could get to it. Tom remained motionless as the black SUV vanished down the street. Although he had no understanding what was going on, it was obvious that this was no coincidence. He was being watched by someone, but they weren't quite ready to come out. Tom couldn't get rid of the feeling that something much more significant was happening as the day drew to a close. He simply had no idea what it was. Tom had trouble falling asleep that night. His mind was spinning with images of the black SUV, and he jumped at every sound outside his window. For what reason were they pursuing him? What were they seeking? He mentally relived the previous several days in an attempt to determine what would have caused this. Assisting the old woman to cross the street was the only oddity that occurred. However, how might that be related? Tom discovered a message on his doorstep the following morning. It was just one piece of nicely folded paper, not in an envelope. He snatched it up and unfolded it with shaking hands. The note was brief, just a few words, and neatly handwritten. "We are observing. Be prepared." Tom felt his heart thumping in his chest. The situation was exacerbated by the enigmatic note. The person following him wasn't merely observing. They were plotting. However, what and why? Tom felt concerned and proceeded to be more cautious than usual throughout the day. The black SUV reappeared, but this time it appeared to maintain a greater distance, as though to alert him that they were still present without getting too close. Tom was now frustrated instead than afraid. He desired answers, but he was clueless about how to obtain them. Tom's phone buzzed that night as he was about to go for home. The message came from an unidentified number. "Meet us at the park," the note said. "Come by yourself." Uncertain of what to do, Tom gazed at his phone. Was this a ruse? Or was this his opportunity to learn the truth at last? He hesitated for a second before making the decision to leave. He was no longer able to live in dread. He had to know. Tom drove to the park as the sun was setting. His mind was racing with potential next steps, and his hands were sweating. There was nobody in the park when he got there. Except for the black SUV sitting near the entrance, there is nobody in the area. The black SUV was not far from where Tom parked his truck. As he exited and made his way to the car, his heart was racing in his chest. Although it was impossible to see who was inside the SUV due to its dark windows, the driver's side door slowly opened as Tom got closer. A man in a black suit emerged. He appeared composed, almost too composed, given the circumstances. The man approached Tom and came to a halt a little distance away. The man said, "Thank you for coming," in a calm, low voice. Tom took a while to reply. He was too preoccupied with the fear that was growing within of him. At last, he worked up the nerve to say anything. "Who are you? You've been following me, but why?" Tom's voice shook a little as he asked. Though it wasn't a reassuring smile, the man did smile. It was the type of smile that made people wonder more. "My name isn't important," the man acknowledged. "What's important is that you did something very kind a few days ago." Tom scowled in perplexity. "What do you mean?" The man went on. "The elderly woman. You assisted her in getting across the street. A modest gesture of goodwill, yet one that was not overlooked." Tom was still trying to figure out what was going on. "What does that have to do with you following me?" After a little interval, the man took something from his pocket. It was a heavy, thick packet. He gave it to Tom. "Open it," said the man. After hesitating, Tom accepted the envelope. As he opened it, his hands were shaking. Tom had never seen so much money in his life, but there were heaps of it inside. His eyes became wide with shock. "Why are you giving me this?" With hardly more than a whisper, Tom asked. The man stepped forward. "Think of it as a prize. The woman you assisted holds great significance for us. She requested that we locate you and express our gratitude in a way that will transform your life." Tom was stunned as he stood there. This was not what he had anticipated. He was carrying more cash than he knew what to do with it, and all he had done was assist a stranger in crossing the street. "But why me?" At last, Tom was able to inquire. The man smiled a little more. "Because the greatest benefits might occasionally result from the simplest deeds of kindness. You never know who might be observing." The man then turned and made his way back to the SUV. After he climbed inside, the car gradually withdrew and vanished into the night. Tom gazed at the envelope in his hands for a considerable amount of time. He had just experienced a sudden and unexpected change in his life, all due to a single act of compassion. His thoughts were racing as he drove home that evening. He reflected on how a single act of empathy and a straightforward gesture had led him to this moment. The envelope included more than enough cash to cover his expenses, advance in life, and begin a new chapter. More than that, though, Tom came to understand the actual power of compassion. One simple action could have a huge impact and alter everything. Tom realized then that he would always remember the lesson he had learned.